We'll start with the teleconference line.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Travis Van Rijs, Global News.
Hi there. I'm guessing this is. I don't know who's at the podium right now.
Travis, it's
Sorry.
Stephen, Del Duca.
Oh, hi, Stephen. Okay, listen, I just wanted to ask you about the vaccine rollout plan. Obviously, the NDP, they are raising concerns about these 34 different plans that are going to be vetted by the vaccine distribution task force. Do you have the same concerns? And what is wrong with having local public health units who have local knowledge create plans for their local communities?
Yeah, for sure. So, look, there is no problem whatsoever with public health playing a leading role in making sure that the vaccines do get distributed in a way that makes sense locally. I do have a couple of concerns. Concern number one is that here we are almost in March, and this is the first that we've heard that the government wants public health to take this kind of leadership role. I've been on the phone and in meetings with people in the medical profession from across Ontario as recently as a week or two ago, when public health leaders in different parts of the province didn't actually know what their role was. So I am continuing to be concerned about how the government seems to be flying by the seat of their pants as it relates to dealing with the pandemic, as it relates to dealing with the vaccine rollout. So that's concern number one. Concern number two is, while I, of course, know that different parts of the province have a lot of different local needs. For example, I heard someone say this morning, Kenora is different from Peel. That is 100% true. And I have a ton of respect for the work that local public health leaders have been doing throughout the pandemic. I am sincerely hopeful that clusters of public health units, for example, in the GTHA, will actually work together. Because if you happen to live in Woodbridge, like my parents do, and you're in York Region's zone or region, and you're watching news that's based out of the 416 in Toronto, and there are different rules in place or guidelines in place between a York region and a Toronto, I think it actually will lead to more confusion. So I would strongly urge, of course, for the government to be listening to public health units, but where the clusters make sense, like the GTA, where there are a lot of similarities, that the difference between the north side of Steeles and the south side of Steeles, close to where I live, is only literally crossing the street, that the guidelines have some kind of things in common. So everyday Ontarians are not overly confused. So those would be my only concerns.
I'm just wondering if you think this is strategic on the government to, create a bit of a scapegoat if things don't go well. They can point to the local public health unit. And also, early on during his time at Queen's Park, the Premier said that he wanted to see some local public health units amalgamated, that he wanted them to drive efficiencies. And yesterday he indicated that he still wants to see that, down the road. I'm just wondering if you can comment on that as well.
So I don't know that if that necessarily the government's looking for someone to blame should, God forbid, things go the wrong way. I do think it does speak to generally how they've not had a coherent and consistent plan. I think there's a real competence deficit from Doug Ford and his government as it relates to the pandemic generally, and specifically the vaccine rollout. I think they know they're behind. They know that they're not dealing with this the way that they should have been dealing with it very definitively from the very beginning. So again, what I said a couple of seconds ago, it's very weird to me, and I would say incompetent that here we are almost in March, and we are hearing for the first time that public health is now going to take the lead and that there'll be 34 plans across the province. That information could have been delivered back over the Christmas holidays, except they decided to take a break and pause the entire process. It could have been delivered in the first week of January, but here we are now again, almost at the end of February into March. And this information coming out now just strikes me as very bizarre and, again, incompetent. On the amalgamation of public health units, I think there's going to come a time at the other side of this pandemic when we will all collectively have to review how our institutions and our leaders performed during this crisis. I think the way that public health has performed should also be analyzed and examined. I'm not a big fan of command and control from Queen's Park and necessarily Doug Ford or any other leader saying this is the way it has to be. I do have a ton of respect for local and regional decision making. So I'd like this conversation to be part of a bigger conversation around how we all did dealing with the pandemic.
I wanted to ask about what the health minister said today in terms of how people will be contacted when it comes to the vaccine. She'd outlined 5 different ways, including, you could go online, you could have a family member help you go online, you could call your local public health unit, they may call you, or you may get a call from your doctor's office. I'm wondering what you see, is there any danger to that, to having so many ways in which a person would be told that they could be getting the vaccine, or is that smart for them to kind of have a diversified approach to this?
Well, first of all, for them to say you might get a call from your doctor's office, I think has come as a bit of news to a lot of family doctors across Ontario. Again, I've had the chance to speak with many one-on-one or in groups over the past few weeks. They haven't been engaged in this conversation. I don't think, for the most part, they've been engaged up until this point. So to hear today that they're suddenly going to become part of the dissemination of the information, I'm sure on the one hand they're relieved because it's the right approach, but I think they're also probably surprised because they haven't gotten the call, they haven't been engaged the way they should have up until now. I do have concerns about seniors in particular, people for whom English is not a first language. Trying to navigate this kind of system that is complex and can be confusing might lead to delays, and we can't afford to delay the rollout. So I would strongly urge the government, use all of your channels, use multilingual media, use all of it, every tool you've got at your disposal to make this clear and coherent and easy for people to digest so we can get the shots in arms and we can get to the other side of the pandemic.
Well, what you're suggesting is that there is a very real possibility that people could fall through the cracks.
Well, throughout the pandemic, we've seen far too many people falling through the cracks. People who work at the lower end of the economy, people for whom, again, English is not a first language, people who are vulnerable, people who are racialized. I mean, there's a long list of Ontarians that Doug Ford has ignored and betrayed throughout this pandemic. And so you'd hope a year into this that he and his team would have learned some lessons from their failures. So again, I hope they look at every channel they've got, every tool they've got, make it clear, make it easy to consume, easy to understand, and use every tool in the toolkit available to make sure that people don't fall through the cracks.
The Minister of Health was talking about the emergency brake today, said that it had been used in Toronto and Peel. Are you clear on what this emergency brake is, how it's going to be used, and just your reaction to that generally?
Yeah, I'm not at all clear on how the emergency brake is used. I think that it's I think we have been lucky to see local public health leaders like Dr. DeVilla and Dr. Lowe stand up and do the right thing. But it's interesting to me to see how Doug Ford's government, and Doug Ford in particular, will listen to public health advice sometimes, but other times he won't. Here's what I mean by that. So Dr. DeVilla and Dr. Lowe, I guess in theory, use the emergency brake, as they call it, and Toronto and Peel are staying closed a little bit longer. But those same medical officers of health have been telling Doug Ford for months to introduce paid sick leave, and he's ignored it. So that goes back to the whole issue of the inconsistency and the incoherence and the confusion. I think most Ontarians would just love to see some consistency, some clarity, and less platitudes from Doug Ford from a podium and meaningful, competent action, which really has been in short supply throughout the pandemic.
I could ask about your own riding. It entered the red zone, and we saw a lot of people swarm stores. There were lineups outside malls. There were lineups inside stores. What do you make of that? I mean, were people just pent up, or is this the government opening up too soon, too quickly?
Yeah. But look, the shocking thing is that we've seen this movie before. It happened last time because York went out ahead of Toronto and Peel the last time. I think it was last October, November, from what I recall. And the same thing happened. The malls, the stores, et cetera, in York region were flooded from people who came from different parts of the province, like Toronto and Peel, that were still locked down. I know that small business needs more help, and Doug Ford's been missing in action to help small business. And I know that people are so fed up and frustrated with the pandemic, and they want to get through to some sense of normalcy again. I don't think York region should have moved out ahead of Toronto and Peel. I think that, if I'm not mistaken, on a per capita basis, the numbers were as high, if not higher, in York before that decision was made. So I'm not quite sure how Dr. Lowe and Dr. DeVilla saw one thing and their colleague in York region saw something different. I get the pressure, and I understand it completely, but it just seems to me that we've been down this path before, and with the new variants in place and the new concern being expressed from epidemiologists and experts across the spectrum, that it would have been more prudent for York region to move in lockstep with Toronto and Peel.
Should there have been some kind of a restriction in place for people from Toronto and Peel to not enter York region? The Premier says he can't put barriers or guards, to kind of man that border. But
Yeah.
should there have been something in place? Should there be, address checks, as an example, in York Region to make sure that if you're from Toronto or Peel, you don't get served like what Prince Edward County did?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, you don't require a border to be closed. It's as simple as asking someone walking into a store or a commercial setting to show some proof of identification with an address. That's one option, but we've seen this occur before, right? Like we've seen Doug Ford tell you and tell Ontarians all of the reasons why something prudent and responsible can't be done. And then the case counts rise, and we're back into some kind of lockdown again, whether it's later in March or it's in April, which nobody wants to see. So
But you would like to see that. You would like to see some kind of an identification, and if you're an out-of-region traveler coming into York Region, you're denied service. That would be something you would like
look,
to see?
I think we should have seen that from the very beginning when we went. I'm talking about last summer when we moved into using different regions prioritized in different ways. I think that's something we could have done fairly easy as a province back then, but Doug Ford has chosen not to do it that way, and we're kind of still in this mess. I would point out we really don't want to put any additional administrative burdens on small business owners. Like they're in real, horrifyingly tough shape in this province right now. And we will not have a true economic recovery that lasts and is successful if we don't put small business first. So I would be loath to put one more burden or throw one more curveball at a small business owner who's just trying to survive when they get into a region that's opened up. But I do think, again, that's why York should have moved in lockstep with Peel and Toronto. We didn't last time. We ended up in a mess again. I think if we want to have some kind of normal summer, some kind of normal Thanksgiving, and a holiday season next December that's normal again, we need a premier to actually step up and stop, screwing up.
All right, perfect.
Thank you.
Stephen.
Have a great day.